I've been wanting to return to this series for a while.
I think I can easily say without any reservation that Higurashi no Nakoroni is my absolute favorite horror series, not just in anime or manga, but in all of fiction. To me, it just hits all the right notes when it comes to good horror. Extensive lore, intimidating atmosphere, great characters who you actually want to see survive.
And something I can't show too much of on YouTube lest I want to get demonetized by my overlords.
At some point, I do want to highlight these characters a little more, but for now I'll say this, Higurashi does yandere better than anyone else. Yeah, you get out of here, Gasai, you ain't got nothing on Rena and her machete.
In the past, I did try to incorporate this series into my channel with even some manga retrospectives, but... honestly, the view counts don't bother me too much, but I do have to admit, those videos weren't some of my best work, as I was still adjusting to reviewing printed media as opposed to animation.
Thanks to the advent of my Precure manga reviews, I think I have at least improved a little in that area, so I might restart the Abducted by Demons videos sometime in the future. Until then though, I do want to do something a little more special considering that the creators of this series have recently released a new series, and it is the Halloween season. Thus, why don't we go back to the very beginning?
Back in his college days, Ryukishi Reina wrote a screenplay for a contest that Deidretrope was holding. Sadly, he didn't win, but his little brother, who just so happened to be a fan of Type Moon's Tsukihime visual novel series, convinced him to take that script, make a few changes, and then make his own series of visual novels. The rest, as they say, is history. Minus maybe an Umineko adaptation that no one likes to talk about.
Many years later, he would finally be able to tell the original story he wanted to, both on a Nintendo Switch game and in manga form.
How many changes did he make in between mediums? Well, let's take a look at the prototype to one of my all-time favorites, the Hinamizawa bus stop.
Our manga opens with a couple of girls rushing to the titular bus stop to get out of the rain. And on top of having a few not all subtle callbacks, these girls kind of look familiar, don't they? Well, no need to wonder for long, as after a little bit of fan service, we immediately got their names, Rika and Mion. And while Mion, at least in these first few pages, seemed pretty much like the exact same boisterous tomboy we all know and love, Rika is, yeah.
Well, I guess she got part of her wish granted. Part of it.
どうしたのリカちゃん負けない
But yeah, originally Rika was a year older than Mion. Oh, and also this was a Yuri story.
Well, that's a drastic change. I mean, that'd be like if this guy was originally a girl, and this girl was originally a guy, and... oh wait.
Yeah, much like how Fate Prototype was pretty much just an outline for an Otome game, this franchise started off in a bit of a different subgenre, though it would sometimes dip their toes into it. And in both cases, they basically turned into harems.
Hey, you gotta pander to the most profitable markets, am I right?
That said, I'm certainly not against this. I mean, I review Precure on a weekly basis, and it is just fun to see these two interact in a way different than the Prime universe, which, the more I think about it, they really didn't interact that much. Anyway, the two were playing hooky by Rika's request. Mion, of course, interpreted this as her planning to confess her love for her, but since this is the haughty adult Rika we're dealing with, she assured her that wasn't the case at all. Still, since they were stuck under a little shelter because of the rain, Mion tried to take advantage of the situation, only to be blocked by a couple of older dudes.
And thus, all of us were cock-blocked.
Feeling like trolling her a little bit, Rika suggested that they could do it if Mion got rid of the guys for her. Thus, she performed her best Danielson impression and understandably freaked the poor guys out. Furthermore, she tried to insinuate that they were planning on doing something that would definitely get this video demonetized, but no worries, as punches to the gut are perfectly okay.
Rika, you ever consider going to AEW with that? They could really use the buff to their women's division.
The two men introduced themselves as Tonegawa and Arakawa. However, Rika was more interested in their attire than anything else. Specifically, she recognized their shoulder badges as being from the construction company overseeing the Hinamizawa Dam project. Yep, that little plot point that will never go away no matter what version of this story you read. And the men were indeed with the company and tried to be friendly with their clientele, and yet this version of Rika was super against the project as opposed to being kind of neutral, as I recall.
Though that might have been because she had a few other things on her plate at the time.
She was so against shaking their hands that she didn't mind doing it with the thirsty lesbian. Tonigawa and Arakawa tried to win her over with a makeshift presentation about the benefits of a dam.
Which, by the way, all this is coming from a raw Japanese manga that I've sort of translated, though I really don't want to have to translate this because, honestly, it's really complicated stuff.
And I'm pretty sure you guys are about as interested in this stuff as Rika is. Though this did lead into one of the more interesting changes between this prototype and the main series. Mion was actually in favor of the dam project. Yeah, as it turns out, the Sonozakis originally didn't have any sort of political pull in Hinamizawa like in the main series, where they pretty much ran the whole shindig as a huge clan of Yakuza.
Which thankfully means that we're all going to be spared from any sort of fingernail rippings. Yeesh.
Thus, this version of Mion had zero obligation to even give a damn, no pun intended, about this town and its residents, and in fact wanted to move away from the boonies with the compensations the government would provide for the dam project.
These traits are actually more in line with Mion's twin Shion, who was completely against her family's traditionalism for many good reasons. But since Mion is an only child in this version of events, I guess you could say this green ponytail is sort of a combination of the twins, Mion's tomboyishness and Shion's rebelliousness.
Anyway, after that little outburst, things got a little awkward and Rika decided to excuse herself for a minute. While she was gone, both Arakawa and Mion had sudden migraines, which, yeah, aren't all that nice to have, especially in the rain. Mion's wasn't nearly as bad as Arakawa's, so they let him use the restroom. While he was gone, another patron arrived on stage, at the bus stop.
Yeah, are you kind of seeing how this would have worked as a stage play, with characters all gathering in one spot in the middle of the stage? Because, honestly, those sorts of amateur productions, I would have loved to see myself.
Anyway, the new player was a bespectacled man with a camera, who of course was Yoshimura.
Yeah, I guess this guy could be Tomitake's prototype, but honestly, I don't think so. I mean, you can make an unloadly Rika, a sea girl Mion, but unswole Tomitake? Yeah, I don't think so.
Anyway, Yoshimura was a freelance writer who was looking for material for his next big story. And since they all had time to kill, he offered to take their pictures.
Because yeah, nothing bad ever happens to characters in horror stories who take group photos, right?
Naturally, they asked what sort of story Yoshimura was trying to write about in their little rural town. He confirmed that it had something to do with the dam, but nothing that they were assuming. Now, the main subject of his article was going to be about the town's guardian deity, Oyashiro-sama.
Damn, Hanyu was legit terrifying in her early days.
But yeah, now it's really starting to feel like Higurashi, with characters just freaking out at the mere mention of the deity and their curse. According to Yoshimura's findings, said curse had already struck 4 victims. More specifically, 4 men involved in the dam project. The first man was named Kondo and,
Yeah, sorry to say, I can't really show anything here due to YouTube's very strict policies, so if you want to see everything in very graphic detail, I do suggest picking this book up on Bookwalker, #notsponsored, and I think Yen Press will translate it eventually, hopefully.
Anyway, to sum it up, Kondo ended up taking the lives of both his family and himself. Investigators theorized drugs being involved, but autopsy reports didn't back it up. More importantly, it seemed like Arakawa was vehemently against talking about this stuff and relating it back to Oyashiro-sama. As if he had something to hide, like how there might have been even more victims. Eventually, he admitted that he had talked to Kondo before the incident. Apparently, the man had been haunted by some sort of invisible presence. It constantly followed him every second of the day. Even when he tried to sleep, he could feel its presence. And he wasn't the only one, as several other workers had similar encounters with it.
And no, we're not talking about a certain clown from an overly long movie.
It was Oyashiro-sama. Mion literally tried to laugh all of this paranormal talk off, but it wasn't all that funny for Arakawa, who, okay, it's just mirrors. This guy's starting to look like a bit of a different manga character.
I don't know, I can't quite put my finger on it, but maybe it'll come to me later.
Anyway, they continued down the victim list, this time to a guy named Kakinuma. Again, he was a close associate of Arakawa who got to know his wife, who kind of looks like the type of lady who enjoys a certain Indian food. He pretty much told him the same story as Kondo, with Oyashiro-sama constantly haunting the poor guy.
Also, major kudos to the illustrator Tomoso for being able to take this and turn it into that.
I mean, obviously, Hanyu wasn't a thing in the original script, but damn, if this story had come out first, I would not be able to look at the Ho-chan voiced Loli the same way. Kakinuma would later be found dead in his car after crashing into a dump truck. However, it wasn't the crash that killed him, but rather his own self-inflicted wounds. Yup, here are the origins of arguably the most grotesque thing to come out of this franchise, and that's saying something, the neck-clawing deaths.
There are several kinds of Oyashiro-sama deaths in this story, and yet Ryukishi would stick with this for most of the franchise. Dude, you are a sadist.
Anyway, they quickly covered another man's far less painful sounding death of just jumping in front of a train, and moved on to the fourth and final man, Mori, who left easily the strongest impression on Arakawa. As, while he initially denied seeing the moment he died, truth was he saw everything, including the man going on a little killing spree before doing himself in.
Again, sorry to say, I can't show the next couple of pages, and honestly, I don't think a lot of you would want to see it anyway. Let me just put it this way. If you've seen the ice pick scene from Perfect Blue, then you've seen this scene. Minus the ball stabbing, because guys should never do that to each other.
That's not cool, Butters. You don't shoot a guy in the dick.
Anyway, Arakawa did try to stop Mori, but one Judas Effect elbow later, and he was almost forcefully turned into a pirate, only saved thanks to the fact that his attacker's neck suddenly got really itchy. Understandably, this had all been very traumatizing for the poor guy, and it had all been brought up by this a-hole. Thankfully, Rika put him in his place by pointing out that doing all this sleuthing might not sit well with Oyashiro-sama. Through all of this talk, no buses had arrived yet. The reason being because there were other people gathering around this little bus stop who had halted all of the traffic going into Hinamizawa. They were being led by yet another familiar looking face. Back at the stop, Arakawa hadn't come out of the bathroom after their little talk, so Rika and Tonegawa decided to check up on him, leaving Mion alone with this dude. At first, he was friendly enough, starting up a little talk about how he had recently gone to Tokyo and spent time at a certain famous amusement park, even though it's actually in Chiba, and...
Oh no, wait, sorry, it was actually the Mouse Land. Oh, totally unrelated to what I was thinking about. Please don't sue.
Anyway, Mion had also recently taken a trip to that same copyright-friendly magical kingdom. Both apparently had stayed in the same hotel near the park, which makes sense, better to stay at the associated hotels as opposed to dealing with these stupid expensive prices in the park. And both tried to sneak in midnight snacks because they didn't like the hotel food, again, very relatable.
On a side note, good gravy, those are expensive noodles. I mean, here's a picture of a vending machine at my condo's parking garage, and assuming that this story takes place in 1983, like most of the franchise, that equates to about $10 US with inflation. Well, can't fault this manga for being inaccurate.
Anyway, while those first few incidents could be easily written off as just pure coincidence, things took a much creepier turn when Yoshimura described an incident where he broke a cell phone his parents had given him after accidentally dropping it in a toilet. And Mion just so happened to have a very similar experience. I'm assuming that they both had the same Hanyu phone strap that I really want. He then described an incident at the Caribbean Pirates ride that Mion also happened to have a very similar kerfuffle at too. And then he described an incident where he encountered some creep janitor wearing an OG Tomitake mask. I mean, yeah, if the G1 Higurashi mask wasn't bad enough, I think you guys can probably put 2 and 2 together at this point. Heck, he pretty much dropped the facade at this point and almost outright admitted that he had been spying on her. He wrapped up Mio's not-so-magical adventure by explaining how they ended up returning home early after she began suffering from severe migraines. Regardless, that one trip completely converted her into a city girl who wanted to move away from Hinamizawa. Yoshimura theorized that, yet again, this probably didn't sit well with Oyashiro-sama. and he believed that her headaches might have been because of her displaying disloyalty to her hometown. With all that said, Mio was just wondering, who the heck is this creepy-ass cameraman? To which he replied, I am.
Wait, hold on just a minute. I see you! Anyway,
He let out a big slasher smile, though honestly I still think the Tomitake mask was a lot creepier. Eventually everyone returned to the bus stop, and the two tried to act like one of them didn't act like a total predator. However, just as things had calmed down, more people arrived. This time a dude with a buzz cut and, Takano? Okay, her name was actually Hoshino, but come on, that's totally Takano, so that's why I'm gonna stick to calling her. Anyway, the two claimed to be with the police and that they were investigating reports of a serial killer who had struck a nearby city and seemed to be heading in the direction of Hinamizawa. The officers began questioning everyone at the bus stop as they suspected that one of them might just be the killer. They of course asked for everyone's identification, with the girls unable to produce anything aside from credit cards, though Mion did try to literally point the finger at her stalker. But Takano was more distracted by the fact that two high schoolers were clearly playing hooky and took them in for questioning.
wow, this is one of the most complicated stated school PSAs I've ever read.
Speaking of whom, Yoshimura was once again left alone with someone, this time Arakawa, and yeah, spoilers, this isn't going to end well. Arakawa's migraine suddenly came back, to which Creeper McStalker Pants decided to share an interesting bit of trivia in that the brain is a muscle that has no actual pain receptors.
Oh yeah, tell that to Kane from RoboCop 2.
He then pointed out that a part of the body that does have a lot of receptors is the stomach, which of course he described in excruciating detail, including explaining how decapitations during seppuku are meant to act as relief.
Dude, do you work for Vox or something? Because I'm pretty sure no one wants to read your damn articles.
Anyway, he tried to figure out the cause of Arakawa's migraines, starting with it possibly being due to sleep deprivation. Arakawa denied it, saying that he was getting at least 7 hours in, but like a petulant child, Yoshimura kept poking at the poor guy suffering from a severe headache. All this stress eventually started to make Arakawa hallucinate his final moments with the first 3 victims of Oyashiro-sama. First, he saw Kakinuma claw his neck in his car, then Kondo dying in an elevator.
Which again, I can't show, but here's the Fensor, and here's what happened to him. You can fill in the blanks.
Lastly, there was Kato, the guy who got hit by a train, whom as it turns out, Arakawa was with in his final moments. The man tried to shadowbox with Oyashiro-sama, not noticing the oncoming train.
Again, here's a nice little demonstration. Though, honestly, this is kind of normal for the Grand Logon, but you get the idea.
Thus, we close out the first half of this manga with Arakawa completely losing his mind. All the while, Yoshimura just watches the poor man begin crawling all over the ground, and oh wait, now I realize who he reminds me of.
I mean, that haircut and the over-the-top freakouts? He's basically turned into Light Yagami from the penultimate chapter of Death Note. Man, if only we could have got to that swimming scene in the anime, am I right? Still, this manga, like many Higurashi manga, is grade A slasher horror.
I know when I say it like that, it kind of sounds like I'm calling this story nothing but a gore fest, which it can be at times, though there's also a lot more to it than just that. For something that takes place all in one remote location due to this being a screenplay for a play on a very limited college budget, the world building here is surprisingly quite strong. As even though they never actually go to it, Hinamizawa feels like a character in of itself. It just feels so alive when these characters describe it either through the lens of a traditionalist or a reformist. And of course, the legends of Oyashiro-sama add a good mystery and suspense element to all of it. For longtime fans like myself, it's also just interesting seeing some of the early beginnings of this series. Even though some of these characters are vastly different than the ones Ryukishi would produce a few years later for the original Demon Abduction chapter, you can still see traces of their finalized characters, including how they would develop later in that telling of the story. Granted, it's also kind of weird seeing these characters have such very different relationships, but again, that's also kind of the appeal of Fate Prototype. What also might really appeal to some is the stuff I couldn't show here. I mean, just so that we're clear, I actually do really like slasher films, and actually do find the more rated R elements of this book really well drawn, but I also realized that it might detract for some. Again, if you're interested, just look for this book through some Japanese e-shops like Bookwalker. Next time though, I'm not totally sure how much I'll be able to show, but hey, it is the season for this sort of stuff, isn't it?
Come back next time when we'll wrap things up, and hopefully I'll have it up in time for Halloween. Otherwise, consider it an early Christmas present. You know everyone will have their ornaments up by then.